Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've prepared another end of year wrap up list. Today we're going to be looking at top 10 indie comic book reads of 2024. And for the sake of this video, a couple points of clarity. This list is comprised of books I read in 2024, whether or not these collections were initially released in 2024, although in a handful of cases they indeed were. Another point of clarity is when I say indie or independent comics, in the sake of this video, that means anything outside of the big two publishers, Marvel and DC Comics. I know my channel does lean more Marvel DC heavy, but I have been trying to break into more independent comic books in recent years, and I definitely have plans to do more so going into the new year for those interested. Before we dive into the video though, just want to shout out the channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're interested in picking up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can actually use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Thank you for considering, now on with the show. First on the list, in no particular order, we have Thundercats Volume 1 Omens by Declan Shalvey and Drew Moss from Dynamite Entertainment. This was a series I was very curious about, especially after interviewing Declan himself earlier this year. Full disclosure, I am a child of the 90s, so Thundercats was already an established property, even before the time I was born, but I remember catching some of the animated series on reruns growing up, and it was definitely a franchise I always kind of dabbled with or was curious about, Thundercats, ho, and all of that. So anyway, when I heard Dynamite had the licensing for it and they planned to make some new comics, I was definitely intrigued. Having an opportunity to read these first couple issues though, I am fully on board. I know Dynamite is still doing more Thundercats comics, along with some spin-offs and kind of shared universe action going on, but what we have here in the pages of this standard size hardcover is essentially a retelling of the origin of the Thundercats. In fact, if you watch the original pilot from the early, 80s, you will see a lot of similar elements. We get to go into a little more greater detail, I would say, in the pages of this graphic novel, which is really fun. I know Declan definitely added some things to the mythos, but yeah, a lot of real nostalgia here. I love the art we get here from Drew Moss as well. A lot of fan favorite characters returning or making their debut, and overall, yeah, this was just a really fun little book. I do plan to review it on the channel. I'm not sure if I will have dropped this review before this video drops or not. My end of year calendar, I'm just shifting things around to make sure I get out videos in time. But yeah, stay tuned for this review if you would like to see my thoughts on more of this run, or even just this collection here, I should say. But yeah, really good stuff. I really like the artist involved. I do like Declan's art. We didn't really get that in this collection other than some maybe variant covers. But yeah, overall, really solid stuff. I think Declan really had a good start to this series. I think loyal fans of the Thundercats will be happy with what they see here, and I think a brand new generation of readers who maybe have no idea who the Thundercats are, this is a really solid start for new readers, and myself only dabbling with this mythos in the past, it was really nice to have a refresh and feel like I could get in at the ground floor of what is, I hope, a really exciting ongoing series. Next on the list today, we have Feral, Volume 1 Indoor Cats, from Tony Fleecs and Trish Forstner and a few others. This was released through Image Comics, and if you haven't heard me talk about this yet, this is definitely a comic I've had in a couple of videos, but this is from the creators of Stray Dogs, which was another series I really enjoyed a few years back. But this is essentially, what do you have if you have a bunch of cats and kind of local animals surviving a kind of zombie apocalypse-like scenario? Instead of a zombie virus, it's just a virulent and mutating form of rabies, but the whole vibe of the comic feels like your standard zombie kind of horror movie or fiction, and I really like the juxtaposition of that kind of horror trope with just this kind of Disney or really animated, rounded, cute animal design. I just think it's a really fun concept. Stray Dogs was really similar, mixing kind of these dogs that were in these cutesy kind of animated style with a straight up psychological horror thriller. Anyway, these creators clearly know what they're doing. I will say a bit of a trigger warning if you don't like animal violence or things like that. It's not too grotesque, but it is something to be mindful of in these series. I, for one, though, definitely enjoyed the ride here with Feral. Unlike Stray Dogs, which was relatively self-contained, this appears to be an ongoing series, and I know where this volume left off, I'm definitely eager for more. If you didn't catch it at the front, I did get this trade paperback signed by two of the series creators, Tony Fleecs, the writer, and Tone Rodriguez, one of the illustrators on the book. They were really kind as well. They were at my local comic shop, so I picked up this volume, got some signatures. Anyway, yeah, fully on board here. I think that that's also one of the reasons it's cracked my top 10, is because I associate this collection with meeting these great comic creators who I'd been wanting to meet. But yeah, overall, I had so much fun with this. I think enjoying Stray Dogs a couple years ago, knowing this team was doing something else in that same wheelhouse, I was definitely eager to check it out, and I know I, for one, will be on the lookout for Volume 2, hopefully sometime in 2025. I would be curious in the comments, has anyone been reading Feral or Stray Dogs? Definitely a little indie series or couple series that I've been really enjoying in recent years. Next on my top 10 indie list, a book I've been wanting to read forever, I finally was able to read and review a few months back. This is The Underwater Welder by Geoff Lemire. This is from Top Shelf Productions, and like I said, this is a book that sat on my wish list to be read pile just what feels like ages. I've always heard really good things about this. I've enjoyed Geoff Lemire, whether it's in the pages of Animal Man, Black Hammer, Sweet Tooth, what have you. He's always kind of popped up. Oh, Moon Knight, that was another one of his I really liked. But this was one of his more creator-owned books I always heard really good and favorable reviews about, but I didn't know a ton about it, admittedly, so I finally picked it up and read it, and wow, what a ride. For those that don't know, this is both written and illustrated by Geoff Lemire. It is all in black and white, other than the cover of the collection, but it follows an underwater welder who's about to be a first-time father. He has a weird experience that triggers his kind of past trauma, and we have him going into a Twilight Zone kind of situation. The book thematically has a lot to do with fathers, sons, legacies, and that time in your life when you're trying to figure out who you are, what you stand for, and what you're going to leave behind. I don't really want to spoil more than that because there's a really just a ton of fun twists and turns in this little collection. At its core, and first and foremost, this is a truly just human story. I'm really impressed to see what Lemire did here. I absolutely felt for these characters, and I think that it just is really a powerful work of fiction. I could easily see this being kind of a novel in and of itself. I could see it adapted for film, but in this medium, I think Lemire had full control over what he was trying to do, obviously, and I just think it's a wonder to behold. There's a kind of dreamy, surreal quality to this whole narrative as well that I think was really fascinating. That's when we go into the kind of Twilight Zone aspects of it, where everything just feels a little bit beyond the scope of normalcy, and we start to get into almost a fantastical level to the storytelling, but again, it's all grounded in the character work, and it's just really a marvel. It's not overlong either. You could definitely read this collection in one sitting. I honestly can't wait to read it again sometime in the future. Okay, the second collection from Declan Shalvey, this is Old Dog Redact 1. This is also from Image Comics, and it's a volume 1 for what I hope is an ongoing series. This was written, illustrated, I believe colored, all from Declan Shalvey as well. This was the collection I bought for myself before my interview with this creator to kind of have something to talk about. I ended up absolutely loving it, and I was really excited to talk to him a little bit about it. Essentially, this is a kind of espionage thriller that has elements of science fiction and even body horror thrown in there. It's a little bit ultra-violent, but it has some really solid character work as well. The story of Old Dog itself is quite a bit of a mystery, and I won't spoil that in the course of this video, but what I can say about it is essentially you have an older gentleman who was in some kind of accident, and now all we know is that he's in the field in kind of a clandestine agency where he does kind of spycraft and espionage. We're not really sure what this agency is about, what it stands for. He seems to be paired up with his daughter, who's kind of his spy handler or co-agent that he works alongside. That relationship is pretty estranged. You go into that a little bit. But along the way, we just have a lot of, like I said, mystery, intrigue, a lot of good character development, and a lot of just good action, pure and simple. I went into this work knowing almost nothing about it, and that's honestly where I'd like to leave you as well. If you like the spy genre with a little bit of a twist that goes into kind of surreal or kind of science fiction tropes, this is definitely a good one to pick up. Like I said, this is only the volume 1 of what I hope will be a long and fruitful series, but even in these couple issues, I'm definitely hooked. The art we have from Declan Shalvey as well is some of the sharpest I've ever seen from him. I also like the variety we get, even with the coloring and kind of the type of work here. I really can't speak highly enough about it. Like I said, this is a series that the mystery is absolutely essential, and you just kind of get the little breadcrumbs uncovering little bits of what might be going on as you go throughout it. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I really think that this was a standout indie title for me this year, and one that I really don't hear a lot of people talking about. I'm not really sure why that is, but I hope to rectify that a bit by including it in my video. Next on my list is another Image title. This is Nocterra, Volume 3, No Breaks, by Scott Snyder and Tony S. Daniel. For those that have been following the channel for some time, Nocterra has been a series I've followed for years now, and this Volume 3 basically caps off the first huge story arc within this world, and really could be a series finale. I'm not sure if they plan to revisit this title in the future, but with these 3 volumes, you definitely have a complete story, beginning, middle, and end. This was a long-awaited collection from me, and I'll admit, when I first read and reviewed it, I perhaps didn't rate it as high as the previous 2 volumes, but that should not reflect poorly on this volume as a whole. I still think that this was a fantastic comic. Here I am putting it in my top 10 indies of the year, and for me, it was just so satisfying to land the plane on this series I enjoyed so much. I will admit, I first came across it because I am a Scott Snyder fan, and I like the idea of kind of a dystopian future fantasy kind of series. And for those that don't know what Nocterra is or what it's about, essentially it's a sci-fi kind of action series set in a world that has been in a kind of state of eternal night. It's basically been night for I think something like 14 years or so, give or take, somewhere around there. But in the darkness, things start to mutate, animals start to hybridize, monsters kind of show up, and things are just not alright. And the vestiges of humanity basically limp along in these small lit communities, and you basically have these ferrymen and ferrywomen. That's their job, a kind of vocation. They basically drive semi-trucks from one area or small alcove of humanity to another through the darkness, and they basically have these big semi-trucks full of supplies or people that's all lit super heavily to try to make their way through the darkness and the monsters. And anyway, our story basically follows a group of these ferrymen as they get kind of caught up in this bigger conspiracy as to what caused this night. Can you ever get daylight back? And basically, that's kind of the gist of the series, and like I said, this caps kind of everything, and it was really overall pretty satisfying. I really like some of the character moments we got throughout this book, and I'm just really happy I finally got to finish out this arc. Next up on my top 10 indies list, this is Rogue Sun Volume 1 Cataclysm by Ryan Parrott and Abel. For those that don't know, this is part of Image Comics' massive universe that began with Radiant Black. That's actually how I first heard about this series, but rest assured, you don't need to read Radiant Black to enjoy this series in its own right. There's slight bits of connective tissue, but again, nothing you need to read before jumping right in if you prefer to start here. Rogue Sun is a superhero kind of narrative, but it's a superhero that fights kind of paranormal or supernatural threats, and I thought that that was a really fun wrinkle or gimmick for the whole series. Basically, the book starts with the mantle of the Rogue Sun, that's the name of this superhero you saw on the front cover, basically passing his mantle along to his son, who was kind of estranged from him. He gets access to this super suit, and all of a sudden he's thrust into a much larger world, having to defend, well, the planet from this kind of supernatural, otherworldly kind of threats or creatures, monsters, plots, things like that. Along the way, he has to contend with the legacy of his father, his family, and so on and so on. The character himself is kind of a high schooler that's a little rough and tumble and not immediately likable, but there are some good, genuine kind of roots of his character we see sprinkled in, even in this first volume, that he is starting to grow on me. Overall, the art direction in this book I think is quite solid. I like how they direct the action, I like the paneling, the layouts, and I think the character models are all really, really fun. I think this book surprised me just in general how much I enjoyed it. I didn't think I'd connect so quickly to this series, especially because I tried it out based on Radiant Black. And again, I was surprised to see how unconnected this was, and that's a really good thing. It didn't feel gimmicky. It didn't feel like I had to read that title to enjoy this. This actually almost felt completely unrelated. I think there's one 2-page spread that shows one of the Radiant characters. Otherwise, again, you could read this completely blank slate. Super good for new readers. And yeah, I just thought it was really, really fun. I look forward to reading subsequent volumes in the future as Abel, but for now, definitely recommend Rogue Sun Volume 1. Next on our list today, the first hardcover, 8 Billion Genies by Charles Soule and Ryan Browne. This was another Image Comics series and one of my favorite reads of the year. I really, really loved this series. Being a collected edition comic book fan, one of the hardest things to do is to wait for a series to reach collected edition, especially when I hear the buzz in, the YouTube scape or on social media or in the comic shops talking about series that maybe only have 1 or 2 issues, but everyone seems to be raving about it. There's so much buzz, and that was certainly the case here for me with 8 Billion Genies. I remember when this came out, I felt like everyone was talking about this series. Those first couple issues, I would see reviews or kind of people just showing the different variant covers they got, and everyone just talked about how much fun it was. And so when it came out in hardcover, the whole series, I couldn't wait to finally get my hands on it, and when I did, I was not disappointed. It was a little different than what I expected, but it was absolutely better than what I expected. 8 Billion Genies begins with what appears at the outset to be an impossible premise, which is, what if every single person in the world was given a genie that could grant them one wish, and what if all of these genies showed up on Earth at the same time? What would happen to the world? And that is the thought experiment that really is the genesis and cornerstone for this entire work here from Charles Soule and Ryan Browne. It is so incredible to me how workable and true they made this feel. I love all the characters. This is really a character-grounded work first, and I think the fact that they were able to execute this premise that feels so broad to tell these really human stories just worked. It was a really fun story, too, that didn't take itself too seriously. The art direction is really vivid and larger than life and pops right from the page. I was really gripped by it from the beginning to the very end. At only a handful of issues, you can definitely read this in one sitting, but this is not a series to be missed out on. I think if you're looking for a place to pick up an independent comic that's maybe outside of that superhero genre, this is one that came out in recent years I could absolutely point to. Don't miss out on 8 Billion Genies. Next up, a book from Boom Studios. This is Once and Future Deluxe Edition Book 1 by Kieron Gillen and Dan Mora, with Tamara Bonvillain on colors. This collection includes a little over half of the run of Once and Future. The entire series is collected across 2 of these oversized hardcover editions, or I believe 5 trade paperbacks if you're going either of those collected edition routes. But essentially, this is a total modern fantasy series that really kind of gravitates around King Arthur legend and lore. We have a lot of other Britain kind of mythology and folklore thrown in as well. I don't want to spoil too much. The series follows a band of, let's call them adventurers or monster hunters. Basically, a young man finds out his grandma has a secret past defending the world from these otherworldly kind of historical folkloric stories, kind of threats to humanity, and now he's caught up in the battle himself. There is so much more to this series than just that, but that's essentially the premise I can give you without spoiling too much. As someone who has a bit of a literary background, I loved this series. I will say it's perfect for new readers, but if you have any background in classic British literature, history, and especially King Arthur sort of legend, that would definitely help you to understand or enjoy this series quite a bit more. The art direction we have in this series, penciled of course by the great Dan Mora and colored by Tamara Bonvillain, it just jumps right off of every page. Everything going on in the kind of mundane aspects of the storytelling is beautifully done, but when things start to get more high fantasy, fantastical, the color saturation amps up and everything is just unbelievably gorgeous. Incidentally, this was also the first series I ever read that had art from Dan Mora, who has now become one of my absolute favorite comic book pencilers in the industry. I first began Once and Future a few years ago, but as of this year, I finally completed this whole series, and it was such an amazing ride, and I love reading it in this beautiful oversized hardcover format. Definitely don't miss out on Once and Future. Next on my list today for Top 10 Indies, I'm going to be talking about Something is Killing the Children Deluxe Edition Book 2 from Boom Studios. This series was written by James Tynion IV and penciled by Werther Dell'Edera. This is a series as well, kind of like Once and Future. I began this series years and years ago, kind of fell off of it, and then I've had a chance to read quite a bit more of it this year, and that's the case here with this Deluxe Edition Book 2. For those that don't know, this collection contains the full big second story arc within the Something is Killing the Children universe. We did have a bit of a prequel story between the first deluxe edition and this one that is not included in these hardcovers yet. But yeah, like I said, this contains the full second story arc, and I never had an opportunity to read it until maybe last month, but I really enjoyed it. I was a huge fan of that first story arc, and I wasn't really sure where the series would go with the next full story. And I'm happy to report it's definitely something decidedly different. We're in a totally different region of the country, we're dealing with a whole new cast of characters, save a small handful of recurring ones like our protagonist Erica Slaughter, but we have a whole other different monster threat who's going around killing children and adults, and we have Erica strolling into town to investigate and hunt down this creature. However, Erica is a bit on the outs with her organization, and so she's fighting a couple different threats at once throughout this volume. I really don't want to spoil a ton here because I hope that those interested in this series will seek it out and read for themselves. What I can say is if you enjoyed the first story arc, you pretty much are guaranteed to enjoy this one as well. Everything that made that first story arc great can be found here, and I feel like they expand the mythos in meaningful ways. I like seeing Erica a bit more out of her element and kind of back up against the wall in many ways. The artwork from Dell'Edera here is equally as strong as what I saw in the first volume, but being in a new location, I like that we got some different color palettes here, and I like seeing his hand at the new monsters and character designs. Overall, this was a huge blast. It was almost impossible to put down, and it definitely continues what I think is one of the best modern horror action series on the market. And last, but certainly not least, on my top 10 indies this year, we have Geiger, the Deluxe Edition by Geoff Johns and Gary Frank. This is from Ghost Machine, which is an imprint within Image Comics, and this book is just an absolute wonder to behold. I first read Geiger in a small, standard-sized trade paperback, and this book is just absolutely gargantuan. I cannot even give you a good idea of the scope of it. I'll try to do a size comparison with the spines of all the other collections after this segment so you can kind of get an idea. If you want further details, definitely check out my review of this book. Back to the actual collection though, what is Geiger if you have no idea? This is the start of the unnamed universe over at the Ghost Machine imprint. Essentially, Geoff Johns and company are making a shared universe of, let's call them superheroes. They're all kind of American tall tale figures that were created for the sake of this universe. They all show up around the times of wars or things like that in American history. Geiger takes place during a kind of future war or immediately afterward. Our story is set in this dystopian wasteland-like future, and our main hero is a radioactive man. After being exposed to an atomic blast, he is now green, glowing, and fighting ready. The story takes place throughout the wasteland. We find a stronghold of humanity in Las Vegas, which is run by kind of mobsters or organized criminals. We have Geiger kind of locking horns with some of these figures throughout a series of misadventures. We have a young set of children that basically need Geiger's help or care as they travel from one end of the wasteland to another. And that's essentially the kind of setup for this series. I don't want to spoil too much because you need to take the ride for yourself. This includes the entire sort of first volume of Geiger, along with parts of the 80-page Super Spectacular and a load of extras. There's a volume 2 of Geiger that basically kicks off the series, I believe, with another issue 1. That's not included in here, but hopefully we'll get deluxe volumes of that sometime in the future. Fingers crossed. Okay, and with that last entry, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up my top 10 independent comic book reads of 2024. And of course, there were many more I could have thrown on this list, and I hope that that's where you'll come in. In the comments section below, I would love for you to share what were some of your favorite comics that didn't come from Marvel or DC this year that you would like to recommend. I would love to see those lists and get some recommendations for myself and other people in this community. I'd also love to hear, did you read any of the comics in my list today? Are you a fan of any of them? I'd love to get some more thoughts. And for those interested who may have stumbled across this video and would like to see my take on top 10 Marvel or DC comic reads, definitely stay tuned. I definitely plan to release those videos on my channel if I haven't already, so definitely check out my recent videos if you'd like to see some more great end of year wrap up kinds of lists. And either way, I hope everyone has a fantastic new year. Thank you for taking this ride with me, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, comment, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thank you so much, and have a good one.